Welcome to the Mary Mavis Show, the show that focuses on remarkable results and your personal power. Here is your host, Mary Mavis.
So today I have two amazing guests on the show, and they're related to each other, mother and daughter. And we're going to have a conversation and hear from each of these women about their ideas, how they think about careers, career planning, and career success from two very different generations. Deirdre BeVards is the Senior Vice President of R&D Strategic Operations for CSL Behring, a global pharmaceutical company. She has the accountability for CSL's clinical trials, project management, patient relationship, and trial-enabling technology across 6 therapeutic areas. In addition, she leads CSL's operations in China and Japan, a very big job. Including her career at CSL, she has 30 years of experience in numerous clinical operations roles across a large handful of companies. Welcome to the show, Deirdre.
Thanks, Mary. Happy to be here.
Aileen BeVards was recently promoted to an account manager role at DLL, a global vendor financing company. Previously, she worked for Thermo Fisher Scientific as a quotation specialist in Switzerland. She graduated in 2018 from Ursinus College with a bachelor's degree in finance and accounting. Welcome, Aileen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Good. All right. So let's get started. And the first question is, how do we really even think about a career? So I'm going to start by saying that 40 years ago, roughly, I started my career. And at that time, and I was in human resources, so I was all about managing people's compensation and performance management. And people came into a career path. There were ladders, and oftentimes for something like engineering, there was a technical ladder and a management ladder that you could go up through. And many people worked for the same company. When I started, there were people at that company that had never worked anywhere else and didn't plan on working anywhere else. So things have changed a lot in 40 years. There is no defined ladder in many cases or for any careers. And most people, if not everyone, doesn't plan or, in fact, stay at the company. So do we think about it as a career path or a ladder? Do we think about it as climbing up? Deirdre, I'm going to start with you because you have the longest career of the two of you. How do you think about a career now, and how has that changed?
Yeah, so like you, Mary, when I started, it was all about a ladder, right? You got into a role and you looked at what the next progression was and what you had to do to get to the next level. And so at the very start of my career, I probably was in that same mindset, but that didn't last too long. And I won't claim credit for the phrase, but I have adopted, it's a jungle gym. It's not a ladder. And so it involves, I think, more of a journey of experiences, and sometimes they take you up, across, down, over, whatever direction the experience really dictates. So I've done that throughout my career. I've had early on a lot of straight up a ladder, but then it was all over the place.
Yeah, and sometimes when I think of jungle gyms, I think of falling.
Yeah, and I've done that. Missteps, a little slippage, but it's also involved things like taking a step back in title, taking a step back in salary, even sometimes, in order to get a given experience. And other times, the title is actually larger than the job in some
Right.
cases.
And what's the difference between a career and a job?
Yeah, so I would say a job for me would be more about, okay, I'm going to earn some income. And it's not necessarily something that by doing it, it's going to expand my views or my experience base or get me into something I haven't done before.
Mhm.
Whereas a career, even though it's, and I can't say, by the way, that I had it planned out, here's what I'm doing in 5 years, 10 years, you got to be a little opportunistic.
Right.
And the career moves are usually the ones that I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with. And you
Right.
know this, Mary, since we have worked together, that if I feel something a little sick to my stomach, it's probably the right career move.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's uncomfortable.
That's right.
Aileen, how about you? It's four
Uh,
4 years since you graduated, right?
yes, I
So
know I'm
how are
getting
you
old.
how have you been thinking about career?
So I tend to agree. I guess I mean I've never heard it described as a jungle gym, but I definitely think it's a better description than a ladder. Especially with my generation, I think that years ago there was this feeling that you needed to be loyal to a company, and it was more
Right.
about the people that you started with and who got you there, and the generations that are upcoming, I think, are much more after what makes them feel good, and a little bit more of that like immediate gratification. So if they get into a job and within a year they're not happy with who they're working with or their compensation or what they're working towards, um, there's a lot more jumping around, and you see that a lot on resumes. So, but I still do think that there is some value to sticking with a company for a certain period of time, as long as you're you're being treated fairly and you have room to grow.
Yeah, so a career doesn't necessarily mean jumping from company to company,
Right.
but a jungle gym, how's a jungle gym different than a path?
Well, I
'Cause that,
think
that does sound like you are like climbing here and over there and
yeah, and I think it's further than just maybe moving roles or having a legitimate job change. It's also being willing to adapt. So right now we're in this, they're calling it the great resignation.
Right.
Being willing to do things that maybe aren't exactly in your job description. Maybe you feel that they're out above your pay grade or below your pay grade or whatever,
mhm,
but being willing to kind of jump in and do that stuff if it is your career. That if you're in, how do I want to word this? If you're in a position where what you're doing is the career path that you want to be on, being willing to do that extra, you know, those extra tasks in order to get ahead and to build your experience, especially when you're young.
yeah, yeah. And so the question of who's in control of your career. So when I started, the company was really in control. I mean, there were rules about when you got promoted and where you could go and where you couldn't go, and if the prevailing idea was that you stayed in the company, then you were sort of in their system. How do you think about who's in control of your career?
So I think I had that early on as well, Mary. It was like and I don't know that it was right either, because sometimes there was if you're
Hmm.
2 years in the seat, you're ready for the next level versus have you gained enough skill and
Right.
experience and maturity of the way you operate to move to the next level. And I think so you've got to be in charge of your own career.
Hmm.
There are plenty of people that you can work with to help enable it, but you have to be in charge of your own career and be willing to take opportunities when they present themselves. And I remember at one point in my career I was actually called opportunistic in a negative way. It was I
Oh,
wasn't going through what people believed was the natural progression. And it was kind of a question of, well, wait a minute, how is this part of your career path? I'm like, I don't get the question. There's an opportunity I might not get again. I'm going to pursue it. And it's funny because though Aileen and I are basically 30 years apart in our journey, we've had already some similar experiences by the opportunity to work overseas, which she had much earlier than I did, but I still had early in my career. And it was one of those moments of, I don't know that I'll be offered this another time. So I took it, not knowing what it was going to be like, but knowing it was definitely going to help me gain new perspective for global business, but also cultural perspective for, broadening my American, very American at the time mindset, which is valuable in any career.
And was that your experience, Aileen?
Yeah, I mean, I think even more so for me, and obviously my mom and I are in a little bit different industries, so there may be some differences there too, but and I love the company that I work for, but it's my personal opinion that, like, you're your own biggest advocate. Nobody is going to project you forward. If you feel that you deserve a promotion, if you feel that it's time for you to move on to a role, you really need to take control of that and make sure that you're on top of it, because really nobody's going to look out for you but you. And that might sound a little bit harsh. It's not that you won't find good people out there, but at the end of the day, if you're not putting yourself out there and volunteering for those types of opportunities, it's not really going to happen. So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that you're in control of your own career path, and that's a good thing, because you putting yourself out there is what differentiates you and can propel you forward.
But it takes courage, and it takes you knowing something about knowing your skills, knowing your interests, and being curious about what is out there, right?
Right.
I also think it's also being willing or ready to accept a no, if that's what happens. You're going to put yourself out there. You're not going to be accepted every time, right? Which, by the way, I have to say, Aileen in a sales role is so much better than I am at hearing no and moving forward. But when you find that in your career, you're going to take a big risk. There's a downside in addition to the upside.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Deirdre, let's stay with you, and I'd love to hear, in hindsight, as you've prepared for this conversation, what are sort of the lessons learned around career planning, thinking, taking? You talked about taking opportunities. What are some of the things that you think about as you reflect on your career?
Yeah, I think the willingness to raise your hand for something is really powerful, because even if it's a short-term assignment or task, it can expose you to a different group of people, and certainly different, perhaps part of the business that is valuable. Because the thing I didn't appreciate early enough or early on was how incredibly powerful networking is. I'm the beneficiary of a wonderful network, and you just never know when somebody is going to help you make a connection or identify an opportunity, and it's always goodwill that you put forward will come back to you. Things you do, especially, or how you help out others without an expectation that you're going to get something in return. I can't tell you how many times that has come back to me with even more value than I think I put out to others.
So being
amazing.
generous
with
others.
Yeah.
And when you say networking, I always think people think it's about, like, well, it used to be about going to events and shaking hands, and now we don't even do that much yet. But are you talking about establishing relationships that become your network?
That's right. It is the relationships and being open to hearing other perspectives and knowing what other people are interested in or looking for. a number of the jobs, most of the positions I've had in my career came through networking.
Yeah.
Only the first couple were through, me just finding an opportunity and applying for it.
Right. And so you're in sales, Aileen, right? You're in
Yes,
sales.
I am.
Yep.
Yeah.
So your relationships are king and queen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are you building a network at this point around your work?
I would definitely say so. I mean, when I came into the industry, I really didn't know very much about it. Yes, I work for a third party lender and it's a financing company, but our our customers are office equipment vendors. And, that was brought up to me and I was kind of like, what do you mean? But it's amazing how fast, when you're working with people, how fast your name can spread, how fast you can learn kind of what people do. And, it's really interesting how fast it spreads. When I was hired in the Midwest territory, and that slowly grew from like Michigan to the Dakotas to, okay, now you're handling other programs, and now you're handling Montana and Idaho, and now with the move into the Southeast. So if I go on my LinkedIn, which I think is a great tool for networking too, right, I have in this industry connections basically all across the United States, which has been just incredible. It's and especially as somebody who's young, it's very helpful to have people who have been in the industry for years who I can learn from and kind of watch and see what they did. And I think it's a really important tool.
Yeah. And I always say that I always make the statement of like, you never know.
Right.
One of my clients right now is the CEO of a company, and we worked 15, 20 years ago together in another firm. And one day he called me and said, hey, guess what? I'm a CEO, and had some work for me. So, that relationship that I established with him, turned up a surprise, an unexpected positive surprise.
Right.
What else? Any other? So we're talking, being opportunistic, raising your hand, building the relationships that support you now and potentially in the future. What are some of the other ways that you think about career? And maybe we'll go over to you, Aileen, and how do you imagine your future? Or do you? Are you like heads down to the job? Building your relationships, making your sales. How do you think about it now to the future?
I think it's a little bit of both. I am a big believer in really putting your head down and grinding when you're young at a job. So for me, I started doing sales when I was 17 or 18 years old. I knew that I liked the challenge of it and the change of pace. So I know that I'm in a field that I enjoy. So I have less of that to figure out. My thing is, I really want to put my head down and drive business now and help my compensation so that in the future, maybe I don't have to grind as hard when I have dependents and hopefully married one day, things like that.
Or maybe in the opposite order.
Right. Well, hopefully not.
Yes, please.
Oh, yes, in the opposite order. Yeah. So yeah, but I think a lot of it also has to do with what drives you, and when you're in sales, I remember doing a training on it one time where we were given a list of things and it was like, rank the importance of these things from 1 to 10. And the things on the list were, it could be, the value or the personalities, the people around me. It could have been the compensation. It could have been knowing that my career has like a bigger impact in the world, whatever it was. And it kind of was somewhat of a personality test where it was like, okay, if you ranked these things in the top 5, you're likely to do well at sales, right? And so for me, it sounds shallow, but it's the truth. My biggest driver is compensation. I'm very money motivated and I'm very competitive. So, things that make me want to work
I
hard
want you on my sales team.
Yeah.
Right.
But, then it's, the things that make me want to work hard are, okay, if I work harder, I get paid more money, really simple like that. So I think that's another thing that helps drive your career is if you know your why per se is, what are you working towards?
And that's very personal.
Mm-hmm.
So, my why has never been about money. I wanted to be well paid, and I am well paid. And I've always been well paid. But it's never been the reason. And I've never been in a job where the more I work, the more money I made. Well, actually, now I am. That's not true, but I hear what you're saying, and the thing that's interesting to me is when I reflect on when I was 22, I was working 7 days a week, or actually 6.5. I would go in on Saturday morning, and I would leave it after lunch. And I was there in the morning before anybody came, and I left after everybody left. And it was because I loved what I was doing. I loved, and guess what I was doing? Writing job descriptions and preparing for job evaluations. Oh my God. I mean, it's like people looked at me like I was nuts, but I was so interested in the jobs across the company and how we were thinking about paying people in different jobs. And so whether it's in sales or whether it's in my case, it was human resources, or in your case, Deirdre, clinical research, right?
Right.
I think it's just a marvelous thing when you really enjoy what you're doing.
And exactly, because like you, Mary, I worked a lot when I was early in my career. I still do. My daughter can tell you how much I've worked and and traveled because of it. But it wasn't because I was going to make any more, although the opportunity for a bonus, if that was there, right? That was always in the back of my mind, but it wasn't a commission based. But it was a combination of I wanted to move quickly through the progression of experience, that would get me higher compensation. It would get me a higher title. I wanted to learn, and I wanted to be noticed for the impact I could make.
Right.
And because that's how you got the promotion or the opportunity. So that was all like sort of the business and what am I trying to do for my own life. But the driver really was around the kind of work I was doing. The clinical research is all about patients and working to improve their lives. And that was the intrinsic value of, if I keep doing this and make it go faster, that's the faster a drug will get out into the world for these patients.
And Deirdre, over the course of your career, obviously you were 22 at one point without children and maybe not even a husband, but think about your timeline. How did how you thought about your career change over the course of your career?
Absolutely. It did, because the work, I knew I was in the right industry, right? I was doing the work I wanted to do, but things really did change over time, especially as I progressed up in management, because it's less about the tangible deliverable, and I'm an execution junkie, right? It's results, results, results. And as we've talked about some of the coaching, Mary, the more you get away from that, you have to change your perspective on the way you add value. And so the things about my career and who I worked for, where I worked, became much more about do my values align with the organization? Do I like the people I work for and with? Am I the right person to lead the team I have to lead?
Right.
And am I adding value for them as well as myself? But it became a lot more about those things that aren't unique to the industry I'm in, but became really important to when I was going to make a move, whether within a company or to a different company.
Yeah. So it changes.
It changes a lot.
It definitely changes. And I know for myself, when we adopted my son, things changed because all of a sudden I couldn't be on all cylinders
Hmm.
because I was orienting this child into a new family. And you take a break. I took 5 months off, and you take a break, and then you go back, and you go back. I went back in a different way. I went back part time, which felt like full time part time, but went back part time, and then when he started school, I made another change. So I do think that, but what I do and the importance it has to me and the threads through it have been similar across my entire career. But it's shaped and reshaped depending on also what was going on in my personal life.
Hmm.
And as you said, Aileen, you're preparing to have this pot of money. It sounds like almost like so you have choices when you get married, when you have a child, if both of those happen for you. Is that how you think about it? Like, this is my, real high earning period. And because I also may make some changes in the future.
Somewhat. I mean, I hope that this isn't my highest earning period of
No,
my
I
whole
just
life.
mean in terms of, head down, making as much money as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially the new role that I'm in, if I am in it long term, and right now I'm happy in it, so I don't see a need for a change as of now. But my opinion is just that I'd rather do the brunt work now to build up that business so that by the time any significant life changes happen for me, it can be a little bit more on autopilot and I will have an easier time managing all of that. I would rather spend my time now, if I'm working longer than I should theoretically be working or whatever. I'd rather do that now than when I have things that are really, really important later in life.
Yeah.
So,
But
So
it's
you think,
interesting, Barry, because I watched Aileen through COVID. We were co-located for a while, and through some of the early time in the pandemic, and I see the grind. Right, Aileen, who
yeah,
works hours and hours at it, and it's easy at my point in my career to go, you should take a breath. Like, there's a long road here, and while at the same time I know I did the same thing, and it's just one more of those examples as a parent or when you mentor people, you can't explain somebody's experience away. Like they've got to live some of the same things
yeah,
you lived in order to create the balance that works for them. But it's fascinating to watch now my daughter and others as you go through that. You're like, oh, but if I knew then what I know now, I might have made different choices. But then again, I might not have ended up where I am. So it's this weird balance of trying to say, slow down a little bit. You've also got to focus on yourself, while at the same time knowing I would have ignored that advice.
yes, and also seeing yourself in your daughter, right? do you see your mother in you, Aileen?
unfortunately,
This was
no.
not.
I'm just kidding. No, yeah, I mean, I get told a lot that I am like her in many ways. And I've even joked with her before and been like, I don't really even think I'm an original human being. I think I'm just you 30 years later. Like it's
We actually even
so
went to the same college, so
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely similarities there. And I think that a lot of the reason that I am career driven is because that's what I watched growing up. She was always um, very, very dedicated to everything she did and worked hard. And so that's the example that I had. And so I guess it's kind of in my blood.
And is there any way you're trying not to be like your mother? In terms of career?
I was going to say, I don't think the podcast is that long, man.
And then I'll ask you, Deirdre, anything you would regret or do differently? But while we're with you, Aileen, anything that you observe that you would say, not me, not, it's not so much that it's wrong, but that's not for me.
I mean, other than maybe the industry, like I did a little bit of time at Thermo Fisher Scientific, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it just wasn't the industry that really interested me. So, but from an outsider's perspective, and keep in mind, I was a kid when she was growing through the ranks, so I didn't see that much detail of what she was really doing career-wise, and wouldn't have even been able to comprehend it until later in life. But there was really nothing that I saw that I was like, oh my God, I hope I'm not like that. The only thing that I will say that she has said to me is, sometimes I think she wishes that she was around a little bit more for like sports events and stuff like that. And I don't want to speak for you, Mom, but yeah, that's what she has told me. And to her point, like I take the advice and I note it, but I don't at this point in my life know how much of that advice I'll end up taking. So, well, yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yes, because you're in your life.
Right.
It's yours, just like it's your career. I remember vividly when my son, who probably was like 7 or something, said, I will never do a job like yours. I said, well, what do you mean? What do I do? He said, you sit at a computer and you talk at the phone. And that was before Zoom was everywhere. And he still does not sit at a computer and talk on the phone for his living. So he was right.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I watched is like her traveling and getting to go to all these places and having a whole lot of influence on it. So I didn't have that same like, wow, that just seems like you do the same thing every day. I didn't have that same view.
Yeah. Good. Deirdre, how about you? Any, I don't mean regrets necessarily, but things that are lessons that you've learned about what you would have done differently or more than you did?
Yeah, it's probably on that same thing of slow down a little bit. Like I think I was always in such a hurry for the next thing or the next move in my career that I think I could have spent some more time really relishing the moment of or moments in the place I was in my career before feeling like I needed to go for the next thing. I learned that later, right? But I would have spent more time there. That probably would have afforded me more time. Like Aileen said, I do say, I wish I had more time to have been present for all of the things that go on with. I have 3 children, right, with all of my kids, and I think it was Aileen. I don't think it was you. I think it was one of the boys that described my job one time. Thought my job was to have meetings on planes. I was always talking about going to a meeting and then going and getting on a plane. Yeah, but there's heart-wrenching moments I had as a mom because I wasn't as present. Thank God my husband, their father was, because we had friends that my husband had to go to a meeting at the school, and I was home, and we offered to watch their kids, and when their mom said, well, you're going to go stay with Aileen and Aiden's mom, and they said they don't have a mom. I was like, oh. Like, just rip my heart out right now because I wasn't around, as much. So that would, I'd say, looking back, I could have put more balance, let's put it that way,
Yeah.
into some of those earlier years.
Yes. And so balance isn't really a part of your thinking process right now, Aileen, right?
It doesn't
It doesn't
need to
sound
be,
like it.
though.
Doesn't
I mean,
need to be.
it's just me, I don't have,
Yeah.
yes, I want to still have, I want to enjoy my 20s and have a social life and stuff but I don't really have anybody else to be responsible for other than myself.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
I have that luxury where I'm kind of able to just dig in because I'm not, there's nobody else. So,
It is quite different. 30 years difference is one. You could always find something in hindsight that you would have changed, right? I mean,
Right.
as far as I can tell, every life isn't perfect or continuously intentional. And when you're at the beginning, it's very hard to see into the future and think about how you're going to feel or what you're going to want. I mean, that's one of the hardest questions, which is, what do I want at any point in time? So, Deirdre, I think early on you spoke about taking a left turn and how sometimes taking a left turn is a really happy thing. You find an opportunity. Have you ever taken a left turn and it ended up being a slippery slope?
Yes. So again, it's that, do I have this career thing all planned out? Absolutely not. So I did. I took what I definitely would call a left turn once I joined a startup software company. No, it was software that's related to the industry, but it was one of those, lots of people looked at me like, you're out of your mind. Um, Again, part of it being, this doesn't follow the normal progression of somebody in your career. But,
Right.
About probably 2 months into it, I kind of went, oh, this probably isn't the right place for me. Because I was I think I was the 12th person hired. Only the second one who wasn't somehow a programmer or in the product development. And when you're in a company that size, every job is a sales job. And
Right.
I'm not my daughter. I'm not a salesperson. Or I don't have that aspiration. So I got into that and it was not the right fit. Um, but I didn't want to jump right away because it was uncomfortable. Because, like I said earlier, discomfort is usually a growth opportunity for me. And by the way, this was, but I knew it's not where I belonged. So I stayed there for, it was less than a year, but I can tell you, when startup is like living 7 years in one, kind of like a dog's
Right.
life. I learned a lot and I got exposed to about 30 different companies in our industry and met people I never would have met otherwise. And I learned so much about myself. And I can tell you, I have taken lessons and feedback and everything else out of that experience that is disproportionate to the length of time I was there.
Yeah. I think some of well, isn't it all a common wisdom that you're going to learn the most from your failures,
Sure.
or learn the most from the bad decisions? But it really is about who you're going to be in your career, that you look for what there is to learn.
Well, exactly. And you know what? And I would never say it was a bad decision or a failure.
Right.
It just wasn't the right place for
Right.
me. But that period of time is what it took for the next opportunity to make sense. Right. So it wasn't available at the time I took the left turn.
So you mentioned feedback. And how important has feedback been to you to make career decisions, the right career decisions for yourself?
It's been really important. I think feedback is a gift. Sometimes it feels like a punch in the gut, but it's a gift, and it is something that sometimes makes you go, "Oh yeah." Okay, so maybe that's right. And one of the early examples is I had a mentor in a previous company who I think he was I didn't know it, but he was testing me, right? He decided to send me to this executive education course, and it wasn't 48 hours that I was there that I got the feedback from the one of the professors of I like to be right. He's like, so Deirdre, here's my observation. You like to be right. And I was like, of course, what's my first thing? Nuh-uh. I don't, not me. I must be right about that. But it was so powerful. I went back to my room that night and called my husband. I'm like, so I have to apologize because apparently I like to be right. He goes, yeah, I know. I'm like, what do you mean you know? And he's like, well, do you think I could tell you that? You're like, you're always right. But that has stuck with me and I know it. And it resonates because it was true, but it also gave me the opportunity to actually focus on it and try to do something about it when it wasn't a productive thing, right?
Yeah, and so how important, I mean, that was a gift that somebody gave you because you were in a program where they were
Yeah.
supposed to give you that gift.
Well,
And they
yeah,
had the courage to tell you what they saw.
right. But when I went back to my job, my boss who sent me there asked me what I took away and what I learned. And when I shared with him, and it was more than just that, he was like, okay, now you're ready. Now you're ready for the next level of leadership in this organization
Right,
because
right.
the reflection, the awareness. And I said to him, if I hadn't said that, he goes, I simply wouldn't have said not anything. I just wouldn't have sponsored you or recommended you for any
Yeah.
higher level role.
Yes, because the people who have the best opportunities are the ones who are going to be as toughest on you, most likely.
Hmm.
Most likely. So, last question for you, and then I want to hear from Aileen also about this. As you were moving up the jungle gym, back and forth and up and over, how did you perceive senior management in the hierarchy? You know, when you looked at senior management roles, did you aspire to them? And how do you think about that now?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I aspired to them. It looked almost glamorous, especially early in my career, because it looked like they had it all together. This was easy. They came across with the right answers or what seemed to be the right answers, so on and so forth. And it just looked like it was a career position that by the time they got there, it was almost effortless, right?
Right.
Um, and and so that was where I was hoping to get the title, the influence, the impact, etc., but really also where things might seem effortless. And I did have somebody early on say to me, be careful how high you strive to go. Make sure it's where you want to be because the view from up there is very different than the view from where you are today. And man, isn't that true? There are curtains I have seen behind that I don't need to see. Right?
Right.
There are certain things that I just don't need to be part of or want to be part of. And then there are others that I very much want to be in the position of having influence or guiding or helping to coach and lead.
Hmm.
I think as you get closer, it's smart to pause and say, do I like the view?
Yes.
Am I happy with this view or am I looking for another one? And when you get that next level view, it's okay to step back down to the one you like better.
Yes, absolutely. And are you and some of it may just be on a timeline.
That's right.
Like, are you at this point in this segment of your life? Is that the role that is going to really fulfill you? And it's really not until
Exactly.
you get to the role
Hmm.
that you would actually know what it was like.
I agree.
So Aileen, so when you look upward, either at one of the two companies or at any company, as you think about these senior executive roles, what do you see? What do you wonder about?
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate that the company that I work for now, a lot of those senior leaders are very open and willing to have conversations and help. So I have had some exposure to, what they do day to day, and what their involvement is, and how deep that goes with like our customers and where it overlaps with the things that I do currently. But from a young person who's pretty early in their career, of course, you look at those people and you're like, well, that's what I want,
Right.
because unlike my mom, I haven't seen behind the curtain. So I'm still blissfully ignorant. I think, I think it's great, which a lot of it probably is, but yeah, so I would say that a lot of them are what I, aspire to do. Sales is something that I really enjoy
Mhm.
right now, but that doesn't mean that one day I wouldn't want to be in some sort of a more management oriented role, or maybe even something else within the same industry. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, from a young person, it's definitely glamorous per se. It's, you look up to those people, you want to be like them, and
Well, that's good because that means you have people that you respect.
Yeah.
yes,
I mean, and that is a really important part. If you look up in the organization and you see leadership that you respect what they do, it's easy to glamorize what they're doing versus understanding the actual reality of their day to day. And yeah, so and you may enjoy looking behind the curtain more than your mother. You never
maybe.
know. You never know because it'll be a different curtain. It'll, you'll be a different person. You're not going to be your mother, because, well, you're not, because you're you. Um, and you're going to have very different careers and very different opportunities. So I mean, my corporate experience, transitioned into my first business when I was 27 years old. And then I went back into a consulting firm. And then I went out when I was 40, I guess, 44 or something like that, into the business that I'm in now. I could not have imagined, I could not have imagined the path that I've taken when I was 20, 21, coming out of college. So,
Right.
But
um,
and it's also, Mary, I also recognize for some folks, I am the person behind the curtain, and
yes,
it's interesting because that's a mindset shift that is not, it's not easy. Like I still think of myself sometimes as that road warrior CRA, that was out in the
yes,
field grinding in monitoring every day of every week. I don't think of myself as somebody who's like, oh, I wonder what she does or what
she's
she's
so
really like.
special.
Yeah, I'm still some schmo sitting in an office doing my thing, right? But making mistakes on a regular basis. But it's funny how you look at others in a way and not recognize that there's someone out there probably looking at you in a similar way, right?
Exactly. And exactly. And even for you, Aileen, as an account manager, somebody coming right out of school is probably looking at you and saying, wow, look what she's accomplished in 4 years. So it is an odd experience.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that, so much of career success is being on the path and making good decisions for yourself
So,
and
yeah.
getting up the slippery slope if you found yourself down there, and being really as intentional as possible about what you want.
And look, I mean, like you said, Aileen's in a role that most of her peers have been in the industry far longer than she has, right? So it's that we go back to that willingness to put yourself out there
Right.
because it just might happen.
It just might happen. Be careful what you ask for. Raising your hand is a good thing, and you might get what you raise your hand for.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I have really enjoyed the conversation today. And I think both of you are phenomenal, phenomenal women, phenomenal leaders. I can't wait to see what you do in your career, Aileen.
Thank
And
you.
Deirdre, you're
Me
not
too.
done. You're
No.
not done.
No, heavens, no.
So I just want to thank you very much for being on the show today with me and sharing your career life.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Thanks for the opportunity, and especially the unique opportunity to do this with my daughter.
You're so welcome. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Today's show was produced by Eric Aubrey. Our theme music was written and produced by Eric Aubrey and Tim McKinstry. The show's graphics were designed by Devin Marciano. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on Google, Apple, or Spotify. You can also find episodes at maviscompany.com, where I invite you to sign up for my weekly newsletter. I hope you use some nugget to help you create remarkable results in your world. Thank you for listening.